Ted Bernard, what's up, brother?
Alan, how are you?
Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Super grateful to Evan Bliss for making the introduction.
No, that guy, he's a connector.
He is. We've had some great conversations with him on the program, and he's brought on a lot of our powerful guests on the show as well.
Yeah, I actually listened to you guys' podcast. I've been a fan of Evan, since we've met. So, yeah, I appreciate him making this connection.
Hell yeah, and I'm pumped to talk to you about executing ideas.
For sure.
And I love the way that you see it there's all these creative opportunities of people actualizing ideas into the world, and that we need the proper allocation of both the investors, the influencers, the execution strategies for the gifts to flourish. And I like that macro level view that you have as you funnel the pieces in for different people to actualize those ideas.
Absolutely.
I'm pumped to unpack that. Let's launch things off with some of our favorite questions. I'm curious, what do you think is the nature of reality?
Yeah, I saw that when I looked at your site and I was like looking through some of the questions, your favorite questions. I was like, I was in deep thought, considering the nature of reality. Yeah. So I think the nature of reality is, I guess, our like social construct, right? So like kind of like the habits that we have, the the makeup of our surroundings, and I guess for everyone that's like dramatically different, because whether you're in like a rural area or a city, your reality shifts, right? What's important to you shifts. The people around you shifts. I think that with everything that's going on in the world now, I think a lot of people have seen reality really kind of become reality. When you think about like, working from home and everything that you thought was like really important in your life, it's had to shift. You had to like distill things down to the essence of, where you are at the present moment. And for a lot of people that was just stuck at home, or for a lot of people that was like being on the front lines. And for them, the nature of reality, I think, was very fluid. So I guess like I guess it's different based on where you are, who you are, and your contribution in the world.
Yeah, that's a perspective on it that's really rooted in the subjective experience of each individual conscious agent. And so I'm curious, that's a very it's a fairly a representation that is more, in a sense, it can be viewed as something that is very much focused around maybe the individual and their individual experience, whether they're in a rural setting or urban setting, whether they are of a specific socioeconomic status, whatnot. And then there's also the sort of, and that can be maybe like a self-actualization, like exterior artistry, North Stars. People have different gifts. Someone just wants to be a good parent. Someone wants to be a business owner of one brick and mortar store. Someone wants to be a Fortune 500 CEO. So there's all these different colors on this color wheel of expression. But then there's also like the self-realization, or the inner engineering, or like what is the nature of consciousness? What do you think about that?
I think that's I guess that also is something that is very relative to each person, right? Because from a spiritual sense, And if you focus your life around your spiritual life, then your perspective on that might be, your connection to your God, and that's like consciousness for you. And then for other people, it's, very tangible, right? Because they are what they do. So them going to work, or, someone like who really like focuses just on their family, and I don't think anyone really does this singularly. I think there's some people out there that are like kind of like anomalies that are like able to say like, hey, I only care about this aspect. And in terms of consciousness, that's what they're like really connected to. But I think a lot of us have pieces of this that we have to like put together, and that it forms our consciousness.
How do you feel about the unity of all being and existence? Do you feel a oneness?
Yeah, like when you mentioned it earlier, I had to like think about it on a variety of like in a variety of capacities, right? And I think that like 2020 has been, this is a great conversation for 2020, because like we've had to go through a pandemic. We've had to go through a political election. We've had to go through like racism, right? Or like to like really understand that it's actually happening for a lot of people. A lot of people already knew it was happening. But when you think about those three things, which for me, that's top of the mind, you would really think that there's like a complete disconnect, right? That there is no oneness. But like I'm a spiritual person, so I tend to believe that everything's connected and everything happens for a reason. So my default setting is that there's a oneness. I'm an optimist by nature, so I constantly think that like everything is working in tandem. So yeah, I do believe that there's a oneness. But like if you look around and you look online and you talk to a lot of people, that might not be reflected.
Yeah, one of the best ways that I've heard this explained is diversity in oneness. That's the Sri Aurobindo and the Mother Mira Alfasa. And it resonates because it synthesizes our last couple of minutes of conversation, where you have both that inner engineering, that true embodied awareness of the unity of all being in existence, and yet simultaneously the experience of all of the different conscious agents, the diversity of life experiences and gifts that are being actualized, execution of ideas and projects. And that when we hold both of those at the same time, simultaneity being key, that kind of plants us firmly, from our understanding on the show, it plants us firmly in what we hypothesize as the nature of reality, which is that you hold both that oneness while you hold the unique individuality that you have and that you get to express in the oneness. Right.
Yeah, I mean, life is duality, right? So there's always going to be like yin yang. There's always going to be hot cold. There's always going to be the two sides.
Yeah, one of my favorite ways to visualize it is that we have the duality is how the creation is being expressed, and what sort of we can potentially see transcends the duality is the unity that incorporates the duality in it. As in, there's one infinite creator expressing itself through all of the different realities, including this one, and the way that it is expressed is through that polarity that we're talking about between two harmonic opposites that are in constant flux.
Right.
Yeah. It sounds like you're pretty familiar with that style of teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I follow like a lot of the kind of same. I mean, first of all, I think if you listen to or read anything personal development, you're gonna always like encounter this, right? Because that's like, it's like human nature about, when you're like trying to build yourself up, when you're trying to grow, to like have to deal with the dualities. So yeah, I'm pretty like, well, not well versed, but I pay attention.
Oh yeah. I like how you also bring it to the level of as a really interesting synthesis in what we talk about in chapter 2 of high level perception, in this idea of trajectory mechanics, is that you have what can be viewed as a synthesis between physicalism with something like Newton's third law of motion, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and a very spiritual perspective, which is that the ascent and descent happen at the same time. So meaning something like, as you're in your personal development, the individual is undergoing something like the beauty of like the actualization of their gifts or the execution of their idea. What would typically happen is something like, wow, I've made a massive step in the upward roller coaster direction. And it's like, yes. And then it's like the next day, like you're usually sent on some sort of a descent. And it's because you're now more prepared, you're more equipped. And this is why people like Carl Jung, from studying tens of thousands of psychoanalysis of different people, was able to abstract out a pattern of that. The roots have to reach hell for the fruits to reach heaven. And that's why the entrepreneurial journey is usually one of the most roller coaster-esque processes.
Yeah, I can see that. And I mean, there's a lot of, of course there's a lot of truth to that. I don't look at it so in terms of entrepreneurship, I don't look at it so in depth. I think it's like kind of actually just really simple. Like pursue something you're passionate about and like work hard. And I think that like life, whether you work hard or not, and whether you pursue something that you're passionate about or not, like life is inevitably going to like throw you some blows. So like if life will inevitably throw you those blows, you might as well be as equipped as possible to handle them. So that's why you like pursue what you're passionate about and work as hard as you can. Yeah. So, I mean, I've like looked into like, I've read Sam Walton's book about, building Walmart, and it's very interesting because like, in retrospect, people are like, man, he's like the richest, like he was the richest man in the world. And I think when he passed away, he left like 10 of his family members on the top, like top richest people, like top billionaires, like top 20 billionaires were like half the Walton family, right? Or half of the list was the Walton family. And like when you read his book, I mean, of course, like he wrote it, so like, you got to take it with a grain of salt. But I think that while he was doing it, he was just going at it. He didn't think that he was going to be the richest man in the world doing it. He just kept on going. And I think that this is like kind of like the distilled version that I like to look at like entrepreneurship as.
Yes, I like that highest level abstraction of identifying what the North Star is and just pursuing that with vigor on a daily basis. I love that. Very simple, refined distillation of it. And then if you double click in and look at it at the higher resolution, you can equip yourself with words like Nassim Taleb says, anti-fragility, right? So you want to take basically the stressor that you experience, the trauma, and you want to quickly see it as a treasure and as a gift and as wisdom that you can bring to the world. And things like this, sort of the more that you see those higher resolution pieces to the journey as well, the more equipped you are. And that's why mentorship is something crucial, because if the mentor tells, for example, I didn't have somebody that was telling me when I was 19 moving to Silicon Valley that, hey kid, anti-fragility is super important. Use your traumas as your greatest treasures. Now we get to provide that to 19-year-olds that are currently in their process, and we can act as that piece for them. My question to you would be that as you identify that highest level abstraction of identifying what is your North Star and then pursuing that with a deep amount of vigor every single day, what would be not only your journey of how you identified what that is for yourself, but also what you're seeing as a pattern for how other people are identifying it. Is it something like just exposure to the different options on the buffet and then sort of intuitively figuring out what is that North Star?
Yeah, I mean, well, I started in entrepreneurship. Like I was 16 years old when I first started my first company. So like I pretty much always knew that I wanted to be in business. So for me, I guess like I didn't really try to identify anything. It just like kind of came to me. And then over time, I guess maybe probably my dad also being semi-entrepreneur, you know, had a lot of the books around. I remember him like kind of forcing me to read The 1 Minute Manager at the beach. I hated reading, so I was like just skimming through, pretending I was reading. But I ended up actually ended up reading the book, and then like he always had like Les Brown around. And when I was younger, I was like a lot more hard focused on like just doing. So that's why I like kind of pushed out some companies really fast. I raised like, you know, my first round of funding when I was 19 for a startup. And now, I mean, I barely finished college, right? I mean, I didn't even want to do that. That was a waste of my time at that point. And now, I mean, in the past like several years, I did more reading in like a year than I did like in 4 years of like high school, and you know.
Yep.
So like I really doubled down on that. So for me, I think that I've always known like kind of what I wanted to do. Like I think life just pushed me in that direction. I never actually went out searching for it. And now I just kind of like have a more tuned in focus, if you will. Because like when life happens to you, you start to understand like what's really important and what's like kind of fleeting. So, you know, when I was younger and I kind of just was only focusing on like the making money aspect of things, and I started to get to know more people that had a lot of money, but got to see like how their lives were, you know, and I was like, oh, snap. I hope I don't get all this money just to like not end up having like some of these more important things, you know? So I pay attention to that a lot more than just like a North Star that basically, you know, dictates what I should be doing based on like my passion or purpose. You know, I try to make sure that I have all the tires with air in them.
This is super interesting. Both that you identify your father's entrepreneurship as something that was part of the catalysis of your interest in figuring out your own entrepreneurial passion, but also that you give this analogy of all four tires of the human vehicle having a solid amount of pressure in them in order for the vehicle to be really strongly roaring along. And the question would be something like, what are your four tires?
I would say like lifestyle, relationships, career, and community.
Okay, let's do this.
Don't ask me to repeat it.
I heard lifestyle,
community, relationships, and career.
Okay, so lifestyle, relationships.
Yeah.
Okay. Community and career.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And lifestyle, relationships, community, and career. So let's unpack the nuances of this in these different tires on the car.
Right.
What does, as we execute ideas into the world, as we pursue these North Stars, what are the nuances of each one of these tires that ensure that we are living a maximum well-being process along the way? Like, what's lifestyle? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's different for a lot of people, right? So like, I guess like people have to just like understand what is important for them. For me, lifestyle has always been able to have a sense of independence. So I always wanted to be able to like kind of just do what I want when I want. And so being able to travel, being able to meet the type of people I want to meet, being able to like represent, like illustrate my personality with the way that I dress or the way that I, act or the way that I speak, that's always been important to me. So that's lifestyle, right? I mean, to me, just like being able to, be yourself and kind of do things the way that you want to do it.
Reminds me of that Alan Watts quote, the artist that does not pander to the gallery.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So
and if you and if I think that you become that artist that like that the audience is like too much in favor, and then you might be doing something wrong.
That's super interesting too. That's a cool way to put it. Like if you don't have haters, you're probably doing something a little bit wrong as well.
I'm trying to get some myself. You know where I could go get some.
Yo, where can I go get that? That's funny.
I'm not a big like I don't really I guess pay attention enough either. So I don't actually ever see them. But yeah, I think that's exactly what I was saying. You just need to be able to make sure that you're always like kind of developing, and in order to grow, you need to have a little bit of like that pain factor. You need to be able to go against the grain a little bit.
Totally.
So yeah, to be actually growing.
Dude, people are insulting me in the comment section on this channel all the time. It's so funny.
Word.
Like on at least, like usually at least on every episode, there's usually a bunch of positive comments about like the guest and like what they're teaching and like myself as an interviewer. And then there'll usually be a comment on those episodes that are something about negative about me. But especially on the ones where it's just me, when I do like yesterday I did a stream on my heroic dose of psilocybin that I took on Saturday, which is 5 grams of an entheogen that then awakens you to the nature of being in reality. And there were huge flood of positive comments, and there were a decent amount of negative ones. And that's been a reoccurring theme as I do these breakdowns of my metaphysics and my ideas about what the nature of consciousness and being is and stuff like that. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, the way that Gary Vaynerchuk and a lot of other people kind of reference this is like, you kind of feel a little bit bad for people that spend their time on writing negative comments to other people. Like,
well, I thank them for the contribution.
And you thank them for the fuel as well.
You're like, hey, thank you. Like,
what kind of a state of consciousness do you have to be in order to write a negative comment? Like, I haven't written a negative comment to somebody in years, and it's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I don't like kind of pay attention to it in either way, because I think that people in their journey are in different places. So I guess I never know what people are going through.
Yep.
When they actually sit down to write something or to say something or to do something, and I think that like hurt people. So like they essentially, that's it. So if someone's saying something negative or doing something negative, you kind of have to also like have a little sympathy and think like, I hope they like develop, in a way that kind of they get past something like that. Or something like that. But you never.
Exactly. Yeah. We've heard that on the show so much. Hurt people. Yeah. And that the evolution of consciousness is moving people away from that malevolence and more towards that enlightenment, and it's really nice. So lifestyle was heavily focused on independence. I like that a lot. How about relationships?
Yeah, relationships is tiered, I guess. Like when you think about like family, friends, your, I guess, romantic partner. I think a lot of that is shifting on how we look at relationships because of kind of, I think, all the technology around us and like being able to like get around, like I have groups of friends in different parts of the world because technology allows that. There was a point in time where you left high school and like you never saw those people again.
Yeah.
And now they're like all on my Facebook.
Yeah.
So like, you know,
Yeah.
that shifts a little bit, like relationships, but and in general though, like life is about like kind of who you have around you and being able to have you know that ecosystem of people. So that's something that if you got all the money and everything else but no relationships, then you've had a terrible go at it.
Yeah. Interesting. I like the breakdown, again, the tiered breakdown of it in family, romantic, friends. It's kind of like you said, it's an ecosystem. I like that a lot. And then let's do community.
Community, I focus on like when I say community, I kind of hyper focus on like kind of your spiritual community and being able to like give back. So I think that it's really important to have like a good circle of people that kind of keep you grounded. And I think in that circle is people that you volunteer with. You kind of give back to like people who are less fortunate. I think that's like really important.
A focus there on spirituality, giving back in community. It's strong, like that. Now, 4, career.
Yeah, and it's funny because I didn't like put them in any specific order, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Because I would put career last, because I think we spend a lot of time focusing on what we're doing, and we identify with that a lot. And I think when you're like if you're pursuing something you're passionate about is great. I mean, for a lot of people, it takes over. So that's why it's really important to have the balance. But yeah, I think career is really important because if you like we're put on this earth. My belief is that we're put on this earth to like work, to create. And I feel like if you're not doing that, then you're missing a huge part of it, and you're likely unfulfilled, despite what you may trick yourself into thinking.
Yeah, I like that a lot as well. So we have the breakdown of career, like in that passion and that North Star, that we are literally here to create, and that we need to identify what that is, and simultaneously we need to identify what the true nature of our being is at the same time. That's that interior self-realization of that one infinite creator and that exterior artistry of our unique North Star actualization. I like this a lot. So
I might need a copy.
Yeah, that's why, this is why we do it on the program.
Yeah.
We do these visualizations. And it happens over and over again with our different guests, is that we get these breakdowns of what their sort of ethos and pillars are to their being, and then we share them with other people, and we play the tennis, which kind of helps unpack it. And so it's usually really insightful, like this one. And so then maybe my next question about this would be something like, now, do you look for these as patterns? Would you say a pattern of maximizing your well-being as you pursue a North Star?
I don't follow the pattern part.
That when you focus on these tires in the car, that the pattern is to identify that you want to ensure that you have strong relationships, like that you want to ensure that you have a deep amount of spirituality and that you're giving back, and that once these tire, the pattern is that you make sure that the pressure is being filled in these tires.
I wish, but I think it's just something I know. And like as you go through life, I mean, unfortunately, on a day-to-day basis, I don't look at this and say, hey, are you hitting all these checklists? Unfortunately, I'm not there yet. But I think, at a high level, I know that these things are important. So like half the battle is just like kind of acknowledging it, and then making sure that I think that as you acknowledge it throughout like your life, it kind of gets fulfilled one way or the other.
Yeah, I like that. It seems to be very intuitive for you, and I like that a lot. And sometimes it doesn't need that quantified self-data visualization component of it, but sometimes it can be really helpful, because then you can actually visualize potentially what the pressure actually is in the tire, whereas sometimes it can be difficult to make that realization until maybe something is occurring where one of your family members or your friends is feeling like, in that relationship tire, that they're not feeling you.
Yeah, I'm like failing at half of it.
Yeah. I'm doing
I
my
just know it's
best.
important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially like well-being is such an important one. It's like this constant reminder to take care, especially of the physical vehicle, that then ensures that everything else downstream is successful. Would it be fair to sort of unpack your macro level view on the process of the formation of Almost Famous Group, and as we sort of unpack that part of your journey, is it fair to say that you also look at these things in the entrepreneurs and the influencers and the investors that you add to your ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. I think that like when you're pursuing, I don't want to say only business, but when you're pursuing opportunities for friendships, opportunities for business, opportunity for anything, right? I think that you have to kind of look at how those like types of people that you want to, connect with, how they fit in to your, kind of life plan. I had a friend who told me something really interesting. It was like the first time I heard it. She was basically like, when you pursue an opportunity, it either has to be like financially rewarding. You either, if not all three, but financially rewarding, or be with people that you really want to work with, or an idea that you really are passionate about. Mm-hmm. So it should fit into one of those three, because a lot of times we take work just because of the money, right? Because we need it, and we're just like, hey, I don't care what it is, I'll just do it. But other times we take on opportunities, especially in the startup realm, where it's just like really cool people, and you just know that you connect. And a lot of incubators, they focus on the people, because if the people work well together, it doesn't matter what they're doing. They're going to be successful at something. And in other people, just like an idea, right? Maybe they evangelize around a certain thing that happens all the time in like politics, right? Like people are like really certain about the Democratic Party or Republican Party, and they push in that direction despite who's the head. I think that in general, I pretty much try to focus on like making sure that people fit, my framework.
And then what would that sort of be like, where someone does fit into that framework, and then how do you sort of add them into this funnel of your ecosystem, and then allocate these like puzzle pieces and resources into the proper kind of trains of ideas that are being executed?
Yeah, so I think that like in life you kind of meet like, or in business you meet like a variety of types of people, right? There's some people that just have, a lot of money but can't come up with an idea of like how to use it, or they probably have a lot of ideas on how to use it but maybe nothing really interesting to them. Some people, like, they just have more money than they know what to do with. So in that scenario, you want to make sure you're like getting people who, or in that scenario, you want to make sure that like you kind of find something that they could be passionate about, that the money's an afterthought. They're like, hey, I just want to pursue this idea. Like if you try to go in with like, hey, I'm going to make you a lot of money from this startup, that's like a really like, obviously people want to make a lot of money if they think they're going to be a unicorn. That helps a lot. But you might not want to lead with that if you're not like, there's like a lot of people that can like promise a lot of money. If you go to any banker, they'll like give you a lot of options. Real estate is like something everyone goes into. So what you really want to do is really be selling them on like what type of lifestyle they can have because of this type of business, or what type of relationships they could build because of this type of business. And the money be kind of like, oh, you'll make money too, but that may not be the core focus. I probably shouldn't be saying that. A lot of people are like, no, I want my money. But I think that's like a huge part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why a lot of people go into entertainment because is it lucrative? Yeah, but is that like the core thing that people are going into it for? Not really, right? They're going into it because they're passionate about that. Like they like the idea of being on a world stage and being able to like walk on a red carpet. That's important to them.
Express themselves.
Yeah, that's a big one. So that I try to focus on like bringing those types of people together. There's like throughout history, there have always been like the artists and their like patrons, like the people who like actually support them. And so I feel like when you're like building a startup, that's kind of like you always got to bring those two people together.
Yeah, looking back, even 500 years ago, we had the Medici family that catalyzed a mass amount of the artistic renaissance and also the scientific because of patroning Michelangelo and Raphael and Botticelli and Da Vinci and Galileo. And similarly today, when we look at the way that venture capital structures work, that there is a sort of investment into the equity of the idea that catalyzes it. Yet there seems to be still some sort of like missing component because not all ideas are ones that are generating money. And this has been really difficult for many, especially scientists, engineers that are trying to, help eradicate some sort of like neurodegeneration. But then it's like, it's going to take me a year, 2, 3 years just to get to a little bit of proof that what I'm doing is eradicating some of those beta amyloid plaque tangles that occur in the formation of Alzheimer's disease. And investors typically want to identify something that is like software, it's scalable, you have an amount of customers, and
it's definitely a hard balance, right? There's definitely like low attention on a lot of industries because it's not cool enough. So but I think it balances out. I can't really say that, but it balances out to some degree, right? Because like you have like wealthy people suffer the same challenges as like everyone else, right? So like when you find like Bill Gates' mom died of cancer, right? So like I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure a lot of his money is going towards like cancer research, So I think that there's like this happens throughout time quite often where someone like suffers an ill fate and they're just like, how do I make sure this never happens again? So like they use against all logic, they basically like plunge into different types of industries because of for whatever reason.
Yes.
Some people go into homelessness because they're just like, I had like, whether I went through it or a family went through it, that was, they think like, I never want to see this happen to someone again,
Yep.
And so without, is there a more balanced way of doing that? Like distributing funds, I'm sure. Right. But people, I feel like life in general kind of like balances out over the course of time.
Yeah, over the course of time for sure. And then there's also sort of making it so that we do the light architecting that we're actually talking about, because we can't live in the world of our vision of having less suffering and more basic needs be met and more gifts being actualized if we don't take those fundamental steps that are required. Like in 1906, when we had the American Antiquities Act with John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt, we looked at our national parks and we were like, we need to make these sacred, where you can't just come in and just absolutely destroy them for capitalistic purposes. And so we did that process, and now we're sort of starting to figure out, well, maybe we should treat the psyche, our mind, also as sacred space as well, divine space as well. Maybe I shouldn't have to have the perverse incentives of the business plans of the attention economy that are mining my data and my attention and creating asymmetries in that and feeding propaganda into my psyche based on that. There's double-edgedness to the sword, of course, because you can also get a recommendation of something that's really strong and a good alignment with you. But these are sort of the ideas that if we want to make it so that beyond the venture capitalist and the founders of a company, that you have like what Silicon Valley introduced into the ecosystem a couple of decades ago, was that, well, let's start having the employees earn equity as well on these vested cliffs that happen every single year. And so that's a good way to sort of stakehold more people into the equation. Maybe the founder and investors each take just a couple less percentage points, and they distribute that across the employees. And maybe one of the next things you want to do is you want to say, well, okay, well, maybe beyond the employees, maybe the customers themselves, the ones that are actually creating a massive part of the company's wealth, maybe they also deserve to earn tokens or shares of equity in the company as well.
That goes to the stock market.
And so then an example where that's countered, in a sense, because it's a good point, is that it doesn't matter if the company goes to the stock market if the example driver for Uber, let's say, has been generating, let's say, $25,000 a year in wealth for Uber, but they have been earning 0 tokens in the ownership of Uber, and Uber is a private company that is not public. And even if it was publicly available and it was being traded as tokens or shares, that driver maybe they've been driving for 8 years. Maybe they've been driving for Uber for a long time at $25,000 a year of wealth generation. That would be $200,000 of wealth generation for Uber.
Yeah,
do they deserve a stake of that?
Yeah, that's like a little bit of I guess as an entrepreneur, like I guess I think about it kind of two ways, right? Because like Uber is like a very risky business. Like ride sharing in general, when it first came out, was like, who'd have thought that it was going to be successful, right? I mean, like we've always been told not to get into the car with a stranger. So they took like a lot of risks to launch their business. So just because someone decided to like start using my product as either a producer or consumer, I don't think that I owe them anything, right? So now when I do decide to let them be part of my company, I think that's when like they could buy, like that's when my company goes public. And there's other platforms. There's a lot of websites now where you could be kind of a micro investor before they go public. Mm-hmm. So if that driver, like if Uber had that sort of plan in place, like some like other startups that aren't as well funded as Uber does, if they had that plan in place, then of course there's a system for you to participate. But case in point is like on average, that person that's like driving for Uber, let's just put it this way, that they're not on these other platforms investing in startups that are risky. You know what I'm saying? So like they're not going on like Republic or like Startup Engine and like putting themselves as an investor and saying, hey, you know what, I use this product, so I want to like, participate in its financial stability. So I kind of think different about that, because like you never know, Uber can still flop, it's still very risky. Airbnb throughout COVID has gone through like a lot of challenges. Now the question is whether or not someone who, like, let's say is an Airbnb host wants to go through those challenges with Airbnb. Like, would they be willing to lose money? Like, will they be willing to like go into debt for for Airbnb. You know what I'm saying? So like that, I look at it this way, because I don't think that just because a company's doing well and I use their product, or I like participate in their ecosystem, I just automatically are owed.
In a sense, to me, on a macro scale, it's as though every human on the planet deserves a share of the pie of our planet. It would be weird for me to not feel that way, like
deserve is a strong word.
like and it
just because you woke up.
Well, and this is where your assessment is very accurate, which is that this sort of heterarchy, a decentralized approach, also incorporates a hierarchy within it at the same time. Because the person on the color wheel that has a North Star that is around providing a good or a service or something of value to millions of people around the planet, in the hierarchy is going to get rewarded with a greater share of that pie that we're talking about. And someone that's waking up and is a good parent or citizen in the world is going to get a lesser share of that pie, but that they still deserve a share of that pie. Just like the biodiversity of the planet deserves a share of the pie. For example, the phytoplankton that is currently across our oceans, that is undergoing the photosynthesis that provides us with 70% of our oxygen, that we take 20,000 inhales per day of, they deserve to be an inclusive stakeholder in our planet's success. But right now they're not, which is why we are acidifying the oceans, and we're also polluting the environment that we don't realize has an interdependent relationship with our own existence. So you see how the inclusive stakeholding idea, in terms of everything having a share in the pie of the planet's trajectory, makes sense at the level of our interdependence and unity.
Yeah, I think that the way you're describing it, I don't know if it translates directly, but I can see how loosely it translates. I get it, in other words.
Yeah, and I'm working on being able to sort of story tell this in ways that are more and more convincing and relatable. And
I mean, a lot of people share this thinking. I mean, there's a new concept, UBI, Universal Basic Income.
And rather than UBI, it should be UBS, Universal Basic Stakeholding. This is what, as you say that, I've already underwent this process by running these economic simulations. It's not about getting income itself. It's about actually having a stake, which then gives you income, but you are an actual inclusive owner rather than just getting paid out. And so that's the next step beyond the actual income, is to be a stakeholder and get paid out, a dividend for your stakeholding.
Right. I get what you're saying. Yeah, I think that I've never been a fan of like nepotism. Like I've never been a fan of like just getting something just because like you're in line, so I feel like, I guess that's an interesting concept. I've never thought through it like this because I've never had to, but that's a very interesting train of thought.
It's really interesting that there's this balance between what we're talking about, in the sense of, I agree with you so much on how in that hierarchy within the heterarchy, there must be a disproportionate asymmetric reward for those that hustle and execute a divine vision that brings value to other people at greater levels than those that are potentially doing something that maybe consumption oriented on a day-to-day basis solely. If somebody is solely playing the video games that other people are producing and focusing maybe 10 hours a day on that gaming process, that unless there is also a component of, like, there's the emerging esports leagues that exist, and maybe they're contributing value in that sense, or maybe they themselves are also interested in designing and producing the games as well, or creating communities around the games that they're playing and creating value that way. There's myriad ways to create value. But if you are solely oriented on a consumption level, you are inevitably going to get less of what the pie is. And so I definitely agree in that sense simultaneously. But on a planetary level, I definitely want to ensure that the basic nutrient needs are being met. And that's why, we spend so much time on the program indicating, like in high level perception, in chapter 1, we talk about this analogy between the tree and the human, and that the nutrients at the root level of the tree need to be met in order for the tree to produce the fruit. Very similarly with the human, that those basic needs need to be met at the nutrient level in order for the human to self-actualize and self-realize both the nature of their being and a unique creative contribution into the world. And that's why you have things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that are obsessed with getting us to zero poverty. I don't currently know, and the planet doesn't currently know, what we're missing out on creatively as unique contributions of people around the world, just because they don't have the basic luxury of tap water, and that they have to carry a jerry can on their head for kilometers to a well and then bring it back every single day and spend that time on that. And that's something to explore. Another thing here, as we were saying before, is we don't know if there's actually models for these UN SDGs that are entrepreneurially, capitalistically create the incentives that then make it so that investors are super interested. Like on a planetary level, how many high net worth investors are, thinking about what they can do by funneling financing into the meeting the basic need of water around the planet without needing to get a 1-year return on that investment or 2-year return.
That's not the issue. The issue isn't finance. I think the gap from kind of the gap between the person needing water in a third world country, or even someplace to be able to use the restroom, and like the financing and availability for, as a society, as a world, to be able to provide that gap in between, that like is corruption, right? There's like a lot of corruption. There's like a lot of abuse. There's a lot of just in general, there's a lot of stuff in between that disables that financing to get to the people. Totally. So I don't think it's just like a, totally. I don't think it's like a war on capitalism that hey, we need to break this thing up, or this is bad because these people are suffering. It's like, if you go to I've been to Bangalore, India, and I talk to the folks that are actually there, and they're like, no, we have a lot of money, but it just well, probably shouldn't say this, but it's a corruption that actually stops them from getting the roads made, because the money's there, but it just doesn't trickle down and
promulgate the vision to other people. You're right that corruption is something that's massively impeding meeting the basic needs and actualization of gifts around the world. And furthermore, though, it seems as though the core of what the most upstream issue is that then leads to all of the downstream things that we're talking about around people that are choosing to be corrupt, or where people are choosing to not identify these basic needs that need to be met around the planet to actualize these gifts. The most upstream thing is consciousness. So the most upstream thing is that the more that somebody realizes the true nature of their being, the interdependence of everything that exists, the unity of all being in existence, when they see the self in the other, when they see that the other is actually another self, it's like an other self. When you get to that level of consciousness, when you're experiencing things that are in the transpersonal and the non-dual space, everything downstream unfolds frictionlessly, perfectly. How does that resonate?
Well, I think Dave Chappelle makes it like a funny joke where he's like, because he doesn't really believe. I think he was listening to like The Secret or something, or reading The Secret, and like kind of like got through like a couple pages of it, and he threw it away because he was like, someone made a. I mean, he understood, like, you know, like, oh, so you mean to tell me that like if these kids in Africa just like understood like, you know, The Secret, then like they would no longer be hungry or something like this. And he was like, no, that's not the case. Like, so for a lot of people, it's not like self-actualization or like consciousness, right? I mean, like they're fully conscious, they know what's going on, they're just like in a scenario that like in a situation that's like not advantageous for them, you know? So like I think that if we decided to break down borders and like anyone could be anywhere they wanted in the world, then I feel like we'll find like the playing field even out really quickly, you know? So I think that like a lot of people are like, they know what they're capable of, you know, they work really hard, but they just don't have like that opportunity. Like we're lucky being born in the US, you know, having the best economy in the world, you know. You're even more lucky, white male. You have every opportunity, you know. So like there's like I think that life deals, we get these cards, but there's like a lot of things that we can do with these cards, right? Like because there's like a lot of people.
Yeah. There appears to be a layers of complexity around the unfolding of consciousness that makes it more multivariate and nuanced to identify some of these most downstream expressions of it. I see a lot of the things that you describe as downstream expressions of consciousness and the social fabric and the structures that we've put it into, and that on a most upstream point for me is the protocols, the architectures, the biomimicry of what currently exists, like in mycorrhizal networks, which is where there's a two-way resource exchange that happens underground between fungi and 95% of plants. That intelligence right there is 1 billion years old. And it's just very hubristic that we think that my 25, 35, 45-year-old existence is going to experience something downstream, and I can solve something downstream by targeting something apparently downstream. Whereas it appears as though the most upstream thing is where the leveraging what was deployed approximately 12 years ago with the Bitcoin white paper and the acknowledgement of what can happen with the decentralization protocols, and you can use tokenomics, you can use smart contracts, you can use what is an embedded biological archetype. It's like why the internet evolved. You know, the internet evolved because it's a biological archetype. Like, we can be viewed as cells in the organism of the planet, and that the cells want to frictionlessly communicate with each other across the planet. And that's why the internet emerges without a sort of without molasses. There's not much molasses. The internet is pretty frictionless.
Yeah.
And that's why the decentralization regarding things like cryptocurrencies are also, like you were saying earlier, when you sort of loosen some of the border structures and you make it more porous, you actually enable the frictionless exchange of value across the planet with what will be Bitcoin and Ethereum and all of these other cryptocurrencies. Plus, you'll enable more creativity, like you say, when the porosity of borders loosens up as well. And it's very clear that we're heading towards that more globalized world, but at the same time, you have 7,000 languages on the planet right now. We're projected for that to drop to 3,500 languages in just the next couple of decades. So we're going to lose half of the planet's languages. And it's being concentrated, obviously, in English, Mandarin, Arabic, Spanish.
Yeah.
And so there's also this driving force of nationalism that is, we can be not disgusting about it. We can be not disgusting about globalization as well. If you drain the dirty bathwater,
Yeah.
and this is why, you know, we make these graphics, because it succinctly describes what we're talking about. This is in chapter 7, the sorting algorithm. You need to drain the dirty bathwater from nationalism and drain the dirty bathwater from globalism, and you need to rescue the baby from each and marry them, because you want to retain the unique languages around the planet.
Yeah.
Because that's beautiful. It's a cultural expression.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a parallel to like all of that. Like when we talk about ecosystems, I mean, when it comes to like business, I've been always fascinated with like marketplaces simply because of this, like, you know, like ecosystem, and it obviously is, you know, obviously has this connection to nature and like, you know, mankind's history. So I've always been fascinated in this sort of thing. It's kind of like really the driving force of my business. I really like to bring different parties together, you know, and I think when you do that over time, you start to see like a lot of development, you know, synergies, and in that you solve a lot of problems that are around.
Yeah, this is to view the world from a market's perspective is extremely enriching and important, and simultaneously to balance that, in a sense, we can view it again like the sorting algorithm, which again feels very archetypal, as we were discussing earlier on the program, that the one infinite creator expresses itself as these two poles that are constantly in a flux. And so in this case, with what we're talking about, it can be thought of as markets, and economics is one of the poles.
Right.
And we have to, in a sense, we have to balance the economics and the markets with something like indigenous wisdom and things like nature and things like science balancing itself with spirituality, modernity balancing itself with indigeneity. That when we do that and we filter out the dirty bathwater from both those things, and we take the good fruits from them and we bring them together, that enables us to more and more create that better future that our hearts know is possible, but that requires these sort of like visionary abstractions that make it easier for people to realize what we're most optimally meant to do to meet basic needs, to eradicate suffering, to create more abundance and more flourishing and more prosperity. Yeah, so to me, it's very much driven around like the most visionary abstractions about the optimization of civilization, and in a very like protopia sense, like protopia meaning just incremental bettering. And yeah, there's a very deep relationship between myself and everything that exists. And it would be the 0.1% unique difference of every single person's unique contribution and gift in the symphony. It's like your solo that you're playing in the symphony. And so that's how the creation expresses itself. It expresses itself with an inward one infinite creator and an exterior infinite artistic expression that's unfolding through these unique individual conscious agents. And so to me, there's nothing that's more important than the most upstream, which is that self-realization and meeting the basic needs for more self-actualization to occur. And it's really deeply intertwined with the executing of ideas.
I agree. I agree. I think that, yeah, when you think about these kind of just different ecosystems and like kind of putting it all together, I think that you find that we naturally kind of create this, like the balance happens, like I was mentioning earlier, where you like naturally want to like solve some of these problems. And I think that like when we talk about executing ideas, it lends itself to like folks that are like they have a problem or they see a problem and they kind of construct a solution, and they use their ecosystem to be able to come together and say, hey, what's the best route to actually like, you know, come together and execute this solution, you know? So, yeah, definitely. I that's why I'm a fan of like kind of like putting together marketplaces, putting together ecosystems, because just bring together a group of people. And I think when you do that, it becomes really powerful.
I want to ask you about this because it really resonated with me, what you were just saying in regards to there's sort of like, as we're talking about like 77,000 different languages around the planet, and it's undergoing like an ethnographic condensation down to 3,500. In all of these different communities across the planet, there's these different philosophies, these different ideologies, these different essences, expressions, creativities, uniqueness of being in these little cultures. And so within their ecosystems, they have different ways to solve problems. And some of them just straight up leapfrog a lot of the existing ways of solving problems. I think it's really interesting when you look at things like Africa doing a big jump in some ways in some countries around getting beyond the telecom infrastructures and jumping straight into mobile and jumping straight into the things like M-Pesa, enabling the banking through the mobile systems. I wonder if there's more of that can be enabled across the planet based on the regional areas creativity and meeting their need regionally, and versus in a sense thinking about it on a planetary level, because in that region there might be a solution that's more optimal given their way of life and living that is better for them than on a planetary level, as we say, is saying let's install clean water taps inside of the community. And maybe their response is something like, no,
I mean, I could only talk about where I've been, and what I've seen firsthand. I mean, and you know, moving back to the U.S. and specifically L.A. from Dubai, and while I was there, I was in the Philippines and spent a lot of time in Europe and India, and I've been able to see like just how they do things in other spaces. And I think one of the most interesting things for me was how Uber operated in India. You know, when I first got there, I thought, you know, no way was I going to be able to get like, they don't, I don't know if they get a lot of credit for like, you know, being able to build things, locally. Like Dubai is only like, don't quote me on it, but I think there's only like 3 million people there or so, you know, and they're kind of like really small, but they've been able to do some like really innovative work. And that's because they've been empowered to do it. Right. I think, and that's what happens when you give people like opportunity. You get people from like kind of all over the world. It's a melting pot. And they've been able to come up with some really good ideas just talking about executing ideas, they've been able to just get it done, you know, like between the Burj Khalifa, tallest building in the world, done in like such a short period of time. Palm Islands, like that's literally like a man-made island, you know. They like really, when blockchain and cryptocurrencies were coming out, they really spearheaded a lot of that stuff. So I thought it was like really interesting when, you know, when you look at like globalization and it's, you know, the shift that it goes into like localization. I think you start to get like a lot of creative ideas.
Yeah, that's so spot on. I like the idea of equipping people, like you say, with your passion. I think that's spot on, very similar to the way that I see it. And as we equip people locally, they end up doing whatever they want creatively. And it's that sort of fabric of opportunity that then enables people to pursue what localized creative process to our problems. And it needs to be done in a balanced way where there's like a relationship, a co-creative relationship with these regions of the world that enable them to figure out that this is how we optimize.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you said too, because there's a lot of places where, you know, what we find really important, they don't feel the same, you know. So it's like, I think that like just because we look at something a specific way doesn't mean that we have to like impede that on other people, you know. Doesn't mean that we have to like pressure them into like, you know, kind of feeling the same way about something. I think when we think about all the people in the world, you know, it's like, how many do you need to be on your side, you know, in order for you to be successful, you know? So if you look at it from that perspective, and I think this is like the benefit of like localization is like, you don't need the whole world to agree with the way you run your grocery store. If it solves like your local problem and you're happy, then by all means continue doing your thing.
I love that. Spot on. Is something that we were talking about before we started that I want to unpack with you is I went through an experience also around about 8 years ago or so where I went to jail for 4 months due to trafficking cannabis.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
Yeah, and it was interesting.
You didn't tell me that earlier.
I didn't tell you before we started. Yeah, that's funny. That's hilarious.
4 months, bro.
It was pounds. It was like 7 pounds, and it was in South Dakota. And that's, you know. And so we're both very passionate about driving reform to where we unleash people that are currently incarcerated in the U.S., especially like Ye says. Meanwhile, the DEA teamed up with the CCA, and you can't have private prisons and you can't have perverse incentives that drive more people to become incarcerated. And that especially when they're there for cannabis, which is a joke, and that people deserve to be with their friends, their families, their creative expression, and in a very intelligent way, decriminalize and legalize for medicinal and recreational purposes all cannabinoids, hemp in the United States. Give me some of your thinking around this?
Yeah, it's very similar. That's a good question because it's very similar to what I mentioned earlier about corruption in these other countries that like prevent the idea of financial freedom and the actualization of that getting down to the people, right? So like the war on drugs is specifically that, is like corruption, and I think when we think about like a lot of like people of color like just being disenfranchised in this country, it stems from corruption. So like it's not that people need a handout or something. It's more that the system needs to be fixed and then balanced out. So yeah, I think that like I got into like cannabis like actually by mistake. Moving here from Dubai, like all drugs are like completely illegal. And I wasn't much into like cannabis before that either, right? I was in Dubai for like 5 years. So I obviously knew it was around, but for sure, since I was on the East Coast, I wasn't really as educated about it as a lot of people on the West Coast. And the West Coast, they've been fighting this fight for a very long time. So kudos to everyone that's been really like applying pressure so that we're even at the point that we're at now.
Yep.
So when I got into cannabis, I specifically got into it because again, with like the combination of investors and building out projects with teams, I had an investor that was interested in building out a marketplace in the space, building out technology in the space. But I worked with him in his company in Dubai on building a marketplace, and so he tapped me as being like a good person to like spearhead like technology, and we kind of bounced around some ideas on what that would look like. And that's where we came, again, my background specifically being in marketplaces. That's when, we came together on like building a marketplace for the cannabis space. And only when I started to get into it is when I started to understand exactly what's happening. I was like very uneducated, and still like it's a lot of work to really unpack things because like, the MORE Act just passed, and there's a lot of like hooray from a lot of people that think, that's like a really good step forward. But there's also like a lot of wording in there that kind of keeps a lot of people, like people of color, disenfranchised, right? So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And I think like the starting point is, there's a lot of social equity programs and things going on, and, we'll take everything, right? Or anything to start. But I think, the first thing that should have been done and should be done is just like everyone that's in prison because of anything cannabis related. It's like really, it sucks that like there's people right now operating businesses where they're like making, so much money, and there's other people that are doing the same exact thing and they're in jail. So I think that's like the first thing that needs to be done, get them out. And then the second thing that can be done is then like equipping them to like really some sort of rehabilitation, right?
Yes, yes.
Where they're able to like get into business that they were already doing,
Yes.
And then from that point on, there's other people that want to get in because they like me, who are like know not much about cannabis, but I just think that I can add value from a technology perspective. And so just like enabling folks like me to be able to say, hey, you know what, this is like the one industry that we could have an equal playing field. We can be playing on an equal playing field, So I think that's like kind of the next step in cannabis. So I think there's steps. There's a lot of people fighting a fight. Like there's a lot of activists that are really knowledgeable and they have a platform. So they're doing a lot. There's a lot of folks doing a good job in communicating what needs to happen. But I think, of course, there's a huge gap between like the activists and government officials actually taking action on kind of the right thing to do. There's a mixed message on, what they believe is the right thing to do. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in this space.
This kind of stuff is nuts. We've had Steve D'Angelo on the show several times, and he's unpacking and Tim Blake did this as well, just the massive lineage of several decades of blood, sweat, and tears that has went on in especially California here in terms of the process of getting back this beautiful secretion from our planet that is here to serve us, And I feel very similarly about entheogens and psychedelics across the entire planet. They're here to serve us, heal us, awaken us, and that they can't fall to the same perverse incentives and forces that have centralized and that have capitalized solely from a profit-driven perspective, and that they need to be prioritized in a decentralized healing and awakening perspective across our planet. And it's nuts that you can have something like someone that's incarcerated today for years and even decades for something that someone is legally doing today now. So, and the rehabilitation process and is critical, and again, eradicating the corruption has a lot to do with the consciousness. You can't have somebody that is in a state of deeply egoic, self-dealing consciousness that is in a place of Congress or in a place of running a Fortune 500 company. You can't keep pumping high fructose corn syrup as Coca-Cola or Pepsi into civilization's social fabric and then pushing all of the downstream effects onto the healthcare industry. When the people in those positions are awakened, which they are slowly becoming more awakened, they're doing things like wanting to have only clean ingredients in their products, and that's slowly creating the social fabric as well as the individual awakening to what is a more beautiful future. On a cannabis front, on a hemp front, entheogen, psychedelics, consumption of information, consumption of products in general, and sort of seeing it from that most upstream perspective over and over again for me has been kind of what has helped me realize that, especially for people in positions of power, we need to see, like, have you ever had a non-dual experience in your life? Have you ever felt the unity of all being in existence? Because if you haven't and you're in Congress, then you're almost surely going to have more self-dealing incentives. So I really reason from this perspective conceptually, and it seems to be most upstream. You're more likely to take a bribe from the pharmaceutical industry or from any lobbyist that has a perverse incentive of wanting to promulgate their high fructose corn syrup or whatever it may be, if you haven't ethically or morally or spiritually awakened yourself. And so viewing it from that perspective is, it's like you need to become a channel for Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness, Lao Tzu, Confucius level consciousness, the highest possible level consciousness, which then makes everything downstream much better. I want to ask you another question.
Shoot.
This is one of our silly questions that we like wrapping the show with. What's your favorite food?
What's my favorite food? You know, man, I like everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on my mood. So I go from like I guess like grilled chicken to fried chicken to sushi to, like, yesterday I had like I just really wanted Thai food.
Yep.
So like it just depends. I go through a season of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I really like sweets, but as a rule I never buy it. So I wait until there's an occasion, like a birthday or something where I know it's going to be there, you know?
There you go. Yeah,
so I just wait.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I like everything, but it just it depends on like kind of, you know, what mood I'm in. Especially like in California, like versus like, let's say Dubai or Miami, right? Because like in California, like you get like a lot of Mexican food. There's a lot of ramen.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen so many ramen restaurants. Yeah. And so, but it's delicious, you know? So yeah, I like everything, but it depends on my mood and kind of like where I am and, you know.
Yeah. Do you like cooking yourself?
I'm a huge fan of cooking.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of cooking. I've been doing a lot of it, especially with this pandemic. I've had to learn, and it saves you a lot of money.
Are you cooking your own grilled and fried chicken?
Not fried, grilled.
Grilled.
I try to be healthy,
Yeah, yeah.
but I like literally just had like fried chicken the other day. I haven't had it in so long,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was like, because it's not really like I feel like you can't really get it a lot of places. Like a lot of restaurants you go to aren't like, and like it's super difficult to cook. Like right, I mean like you gotta.
It takes more time for sure.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
have to get oil and
Yeah,
cooking oil.
nah,
Yeah,
I'm good on
yeah.
that.
You have to get the batter to actually stick on the chicken, which is one of the hard parts too.
I've been doing bolognese, and I've been doing like I've like baked chicken, asparagus, and like sweet potatoes.
I love that.
I'll do
Huge
that.
Huge fan of that.
Yeah,
Sweet potato and asparagus are two of my favorite sides as well.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
so good.
yeah. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of cooking, so it's really cool. Like I mean, throughout this time, like we've had like a lot of opportunity to like look within, right? So like basically, you know, I think like between like cooking and focusing on like really like I want to say your personal development, but I feel like that's like kind of just diluting it, you know. But like being like, you know, with stay-at-home orders here and there, you know, things opening up and then closing. Like soon as things opened up, I started to really think about like what is the most important thing to me, you know. I was like, what did I miss the most? So in a lot of cases, that was like going to like some of my favorite restaurants that just opened, you know. One thing that I really wish happened was like you know, music venues. Like, you know, I love live music, and that's like something I've like really missed throughout this time. So that kind of sucks. But yeah, like just I think in this time period, I've been able to like focus on like, you know, just being able to like when I think about cooking and putting together ingredients, it just reminds me a lot. You know, it reminds me a lot about like, you know, myself and business, you know, like when you think about like these 4 tires that we talked about earlier, and like making sure like I've just, you know, like think about like what's going to be done after you like put those ingredients together, you know.
Exactly.
So
yeah, and that's a great way to wrap, is to reconnect on these points, these tires: lifestyle, relationships, community, career. Under lifestyle, independence; under relationships, family, romance, friends; under community, spirituality, giving back; under career, passion, North Star. Beautiful.
yeah.
Thanks for coming on the program, my brother.
Thank you for having me. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. It's been great. It's been
Hella
great.
fun.
Yeah. So what happens next? How does this work?
So now we thank our audience. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I greatly appreciate you. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on the episode. Let us know what you think about everything that Ted's sharing with us about executing ideas. We'd love to hear from you. You can check out the links in the bio below. We have both Ted's website. We have his Instagram profile. We have his LinkedIn profile. Go give him a follow. Go and connect with him on those platforms. Reach out if you'd like. And support the artists, the entrepreneurs, the spiritual leaders, the scientists and engineers around the world that you believe in. Support them and help them flourish. You can support Simulation. Our links are below to our show. Help us execute our biggest goals out here as well. And that's all, folks. Execute your ideas into the world. We love you very much. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Evan, for making the intro. We love you very much, too. And go and build that future. A more beautiful future our hearts know is possible. See you soon.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ted. Peace.